You've reached Hotel Pacifico, your 5-star destination for BC politicos. Press 4 for room service. Press the star key for your hosts Mike McDonald and Kate Hammer.
Welcome back, guests. Thanks for joining us again for early check-in at Hotel Pacifico. Good to see you, Mike and Geoff.
Good morning.
Great to see Geoff back today.
We're glad to have you back, Geoff.
Glad to be back.
All refreshed after a little day off?
Well, it wasn't a refreshing day, but it was fine. I'm great.
Okay. We're going to welcome Don Guy from Polaris Strategic Insights, who'll be joining us shortly with some new numbers right out of the toaster. Mike McDonald wrote that line. They're out of the toaster, Mike?
Kind of like a Pop-Tart.
Oh, God. All right. I know Don's with me in the eye roll on that one, 100%. Okay. And stick around, guests, later for the espresso bar. First, we'll do our regular check-in on where the leaders are today. I mean, that's an easy one. Everyone's getting ready for the debate. We've got the CKNW radio debate shortly after we record, actually at 9 a.m. We're really excited to actually talk about that tomorrow. And then later, they're all going to the GV Bot luncheon in Vancouver. And then I think there'll be some polling data from business leaders there that'll be fresh.
That's the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade.
Yeah. Greater Vancouver Board of Trade. Yes, sorry, I'll spell out my acronyms. Sorry.
Can we get a background around that, Kate?
You're not meeting with the bots at lunchtime.
No, just business leaders. Different type of bot. All right. And so we're going to go to our special segment actually with Don. It's Milking the Data, brought to you by BC Dairy. Farmers need guaranteed access to water to feed BC. Mike, can you introduce Don for us today?
I sure can. Don Guy is what are you, Don? Don is a political mastermind who has run many winning campaigns across Canada, but in his normal life, he is the owner of Polaris Strategic Insights and the principal of GT and Company. And Don and I have had the good fortune, at least in my good fortune, of working with Don in past campaigns and know how brilliant he is. But today he's going to join us and talk about these numbers that Polaris is tracking on a nightly basis, with 200 interviews a night, giving us a rolling track to look at that we're happy to give listeners a glimpse from time to time here. Well, first of all, good morning, Don.
Morning, and it's a pleasure to be with three old friends. Mike, I'm applying old to you specifically, but it's a treat to be on, and I just want to say I'm a huge fan of what the three of you are doing with this podcast. So thanks for inviting me.
Well, older males who come on the pod tend to have gray beards, so you're not really on message there, but we'll overlook that today.
Makes up for it with a fabulous suit. Thank you, Don.
Does anyone want to hear some numbers? Does anyone want to hear some numbers? Okay, Geoff wants to hear some numbers.
Jeff's
I'm not
excited.
sure you want to
He's
hear
got
the
his
numbers,
pen out.
Geoff. Anyways, today, after last 5 days of tracking to about 200 interviews a night, we have the race at 44 Conservative, 41 NDP, 11 Green, and 5 some other party / independent candidate. The one thing I think we've noticed is that the older voters are tightening up a little bit, and the NDP advantage with older voters is not as great as it was at the outset of the campaign. But overall, though, the election's very tight, and continues to, I wouldn't necessarily say it's a stalemate, but it seems pretty close in the last 4 or 5 days to that. What do you think, Don?
Yeah, and the tendency to look at the top line numbers is to assume that when there's stability and tightness that there's nothing happening, and as all of us know, that's not actually. There's pinging back and forth underneath those top lines, and we're certainly seeing some of that where the Conservatives are starting to close the gap with the over 50s and the over 65s. That the NDP have enjoyed that advantage, and there's a big turnout advantage associated with that demographic. But on the other hand, the NDP is starting to get a little bit back from the Greens and from some other places among some of those younger voters. And the game still appears to be the Lower Mainland. So I think the debate's really going to matter, to be honest, because I'm not sure people really know what to think yet.
Mm-hmm.
What do we know about what's happening to that Green vote? Because I think so. Two important things. One is now that we have all the candidates locked in, we do have a pretty big number of ridings without Greens and a pretty big number in kind of Surrey and these important places. And then I feel like I've seen it both ways. I think I've seen it showing the Greens going to the Conservatives, and I've seen it seeing the advantage of that Green vote going to the NDP. What do we know about what that is?
Well, Mike, jump in here.
Yeah. Well, I think at this point, the Greens that are still left as identifying as Greens are overwhelmingly favor the NDP compared to the Conservatives, although there's a significant group that do not state a second choice or do not know or may not vote. But it's advantage NDP, and we talked yesterday on the pod about the missing Greens, the 24 ridings that they are not contesting in this election, and a number of those, 5, 6, 7 of them, are at least seats that are in contention. And that's got to help the NDP, I would think, especially in a riding like Vernon, which has 16% Green vote last time. How's that going to break this time? If they're not on the ballot. And some of that will go NDP, some of that may go to the independent candidate who's quite strong in Vernon. But it's a bit hard to predict, but overall I'd have to say if it was a dead heat between the parties and there's no Green, there was one last time, the NDP are going to have that might be a seat the NDP win.
Yeah.
I think if there's sorry, Geoff, go ahead.
Well, you're bringing us data, so maybe you don't want to do the opinions, but I would argue that Rasta would probably want to keep doing what he's doing because it's been working so far, and that the NDP campaign has been pretty competent and gaffe-free and looks pretty good. But is there some special sauce or ingredient you think is oddly missing from the NDP campaign that you would try to add in if you were advising them today?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I just want to pick up on what Mike said quickly, because I think it sets context for the answer, which is the dynamic of the race so far has been, notwithstanding the fact that, most New Democrats and most Greens would say that they're each other's second choice. The dynamic so far, the Conservative growth has been from the Conservatives optimizing a much smaller pool of second choice voters from the Greens and the NDP, and to some extent undecideds. And you see that in the extent to which, under the surface of those decided numbers, the Conservatives have a much higher number of leaners who are recent converts in that number. I think you're right. Honestly, Geoff, I think if you're the Conservatives, you want to keep doing what you're doing because it's obviously working. And if you're the NDP, I don't think running a competent gaffe-free campaign is going to be enough. There has to be some strong differentiator that's currently not in the mix. It doesn't mean go out and make a desperate last-minute promise of a tax cut or whatever the case may be. But it does mean that you're going to need to find a way to amplify and make relevant to a set of voters an issue that they're not currently thinking about.
It seems like two of their opportunities would be, on the one hand, try to drive a discussion on healthcare that's to their advantage, that regains that advantage with older voters. And secondly is to find a formula to squeeze a couple points off the Greens and, polarize it to get the Greens scared enough about the Conservatives that they'll move over to the NDP. Those would be two on my top of my list if I were an NDP strategist.
And I think the reason I said that I think the debate's going to be important, because I'm not sure that leader image is really playing much of a role in these ballot considerations, right? So far it's party brands. And the Conservative Party brand in BC is strong for a number of reasons, and it's kind of new and fresh. And the NDP have been in government for a while, so that's why I say, competent gaffe-free is not going to be enough. I don't think, Geoff. You and I have been in these circumstances before, and you need something that is going to reinvigorate your coalition and give people who are sitting on the fence a reason to vote for you. And it may be, depending on the performance, that the performance in the debate, that leader image considerations start to play a role.
So are we going to see, I want to put that as a question about how much the leader image is going to play into it, right? Because I think we have seen just a really low awareness so far in the electorate. We've got the radio debate today, and then on the 8th, we've got the televised debate. If we kind of come out of those and we still see a pretty low awareness, is that probably going to continue to be the status quo through E-Day on the 19th?
Well, I guess it speaks to that point that what's at stake. Do people feel that things will change significantly if there's a change in government? And I think that's part of what the NDP needs to find a way to prosecute. On the other hand, the Conservatives have found a coalition of voters, a universe of voters that are very happy with the changes that they're proposing. And as I say, so far that's had some momentum. It certainly has had a ton of momentum leading up to the drop of the writ to get them where they are. And it continues to have some momentum, although that seems to be slowing and they may be reaching their cap.
And that coalition's not bothered by some of the attacks from the NDP, it would seem to.
Well, you raise a good point, Don, about voters seeing change, right? We know there's time for a change sentiment, but the more out there the Conservatives are, whether it's their candidates or their policies, and we'll talk a bit about that in a few minutes, their policies are quite out there compared to past elections. Some of their policy prescriptions are pretty bold, let's put it that way. Mm-hmm. And the bigger the gulf is between them and the NDP, kind of drives the point that if people vote Conservative, there is going to be change. It may not be the change that they're expecting or that they particularly like, but what they're hearing is that there is a big difference between the NDP and the Conservatives. Mm-hmm. It's a big difference in terms of the candidates and their outlook on life. There's a big difference on the policies. So yeah, you want change, you got a choice. Now, be careful what you wish for, right?
Yeah.
Now, one before we let you go here, Don, one little trick out of the bag of tricks I was thinking about that the NDP, somebody in the NDP campaign may bring up is the famous Gregor Robertson apology of 2014, where seeking the third term to be mayor of Vancouver went to the voters and said, okay, we'd like one more chance here. It's important and we're better than the other guys. Do you think there's a climate there for the NDP to go to voters and say, Brandon, David Eby hasn't had a full term yet. This is similar. We talked about the other day, Christy Clark, being in power for 2 years and getting her mandate, and Eby hasn't got that yet. He's got favorable leadership numbers. Is there a space there for him to say, I feel your pain. We're going to work on it. Give me another shot.
Yeah, it's a great question. Funny enough, I'm getting that apology question a lot in other contexts as well. And as Geoff recalls, that had a specific context where there was a subset of voters that were identified in the polling at the end of the campaign who were upset in particular about one issue, who felt that the mayor was overly focused on that issue at the expense of others, and that kind of teed it up. I think what's going on so far provincially is, as I said, leaders aren't a part of it. So it's more a general malaise with the incumbent government and a demand for change that among some voters that the Conservatives are appealing to and optimizing for. The idea of, and maybe that's the way you insert the leader consideration into it.
Don, that was a near-death political experience for me, because I was clearly losing before Gregor Robertson made the apology, and I scraped through with a handful of votes to get a third term on that group. But I would say, first of all, I never had a chance to say this to you, but when I heard Gregor make the apology, I said to myself, this will never work, but it did. And I think it did because it was a very personal attitude voters had about Gregor, which allowed a lot of people to come home who had got fed up. And so the last point I would make is this, and Mike and I talk about this a lot, and so does Kate. You had him on, or we had him on a CBC morning broadcast that was broadly listened to. Even then, we're talking about 2014, media penetration of the legacy media was vastly larger than it is today. And so I think a lot of voters are looking at the Conservatives and they're going, that's the one to change to. And they're not really hearing whether or not there's going to be a referendum on taxation, or whether we're going to tear up DRIPA or any of those other things. And if they did hear about them, they may not care. So it's quite a different dynamic. I think it's hard for the EB team to figure out what that magic bullet might be. Completely agree, Geoff. And by the way, and the credit for that tactic belongs to Gregor himself. He's the one who, it was his gut was telling him, and he's the one who wanted to do it. And he did an amazing job delivering it, right, in a way that connected. And maybe this is kind of what we're coming down to. Is EB connecting? Is he connecting based on what he's done to date? Is he connecting in terms of what he wants to do going forward? Is he connecting in a way that that would pull back some of those change voters? And you're right. And partly it's the structure of social media now, and how it's the emotion, right? It's not the specific issues that are connecting so much anymore. It's the emotion. And what Gregor did really well in 2014 was find a way to connect with that emotion. He was hearing it on the stump and from you and from others, and he was feeling it himself. So what is that emotional chord that is currently connecting with EB himself that they can make relevant? That remains to be seen, but it does need to happen, I think, to close the gap and to actually pull an election out for the NDP. On the other hand, notwithstanding the fact that the Conservatives are clearly connecting with that emotion that's driving their voters, and that's the story of the past year.
They're getting a lot out of their universe.
Yeah. Don, we have to have you back sometime, I think, to talk about just apologies. I think I could pick your brain all day about and we've been watching this and talking about this a bit too, just watching the different leaders across the country and how an apology lands or doesn't. I think this is getting ahead. I was going to toast this in the espresso bar, but I think we're moving into an era when the apology, historically might have had more to do with what you're apologizing about, and now is more about the messenger and how believable they are. It's completely, it's the issue versus the person is become more critical to the apology itself. And so I don't know if you'll come back on, but we'd love to have you to talk about this more deeply.
Well, I've loved this chat, so I'm happy to come on anytime. And the advantage of being with each of the three of you, either here or to get one-on-one, is I always learn something. And so it's I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks, Don.
Jess, have you ever had the experience of looking at your energy bill and seeing a weird spike you can't explain? The problem in my house is by the time we see the spike, it's long enough ago that we're a bit baffled at how to explain it. And if you care at all about optimizing your home energy use, which, let's face it, is kind of all of us these days, it can feel like a missed opportunity. which is why presenting sponsor TELUS is launching Smart Energy, a global first solution that helps Canadians manage their home energy consumption more effectively, saving up to 15% on their energy bills and reducing their environmental footprint, all through one simple app. To further benefit the environment, TELUS is planting 4 trees per year on behalf of each Smart Energy subscriber. For more information and to explore how much you can save every year with Smart Energy, visit TELUS.com/Smart Energy.
Let's talk about yesterday on the campaign trail. And I want to say there were no Eagles yesterday. Your prediction, Mike, did not follow through on the Eagles. But there was a bit of alas, but there was a lot from John Rostad and his energy policy. And I want to say one of the things that was interesting, it felt a little bit to me like there was a bit of, I was reminded of George H.W. Bush, read my lips, no new taxes without a referendum. And I think on top of that, too, a big promise around energy. And I think a lot of getting rid of the build out towards banning gas vehicles and home heating, and then sort of doubling down on other energy sources where there's a business case. Let's talk a bit about these types of promises. Like they are, again, I think you were saying this, Mike, like they are a little bit out there. Like he's really reaching into the, like, let's rip it up. Let's kind of forget the energy transition. Let's give the people the power to vote on taxes. Like, is this landing, do we think?
Well, he dropped two big ones yesterday. Well, first of all, no new taxes without a referendum. It's massive. Now,
no
in
backgrounder.
reality,
I just want to point that out.
No backgrounder. Yes. Thank you. Keeping us honest, Geoff Meggs.
I don't know if we need a backgrounder on that one.
They're done.
But,
the day the backgrounder is done.
The backgrounder
with
might
the
say
traditional media.
California's done this, and it's made it very hard to increase taxes. And they've had a very interesting journey in California since I think it was Proposition 40 or something. But
13.
Yeah.
So
that is. Now, if they were to bring that in, it's an act of the legislature. So another government could come in and bring in another act of the legislature and get rid of it. So it's not like a forever
an act
thing.
to say that taxes can't be raised without referendum.
Yeah, but it might be very politically difficult to do that. Once you've given voters the power to approve new taxes, they may never want to give it up. And you can just imagine Bill Thielman running referendums against every tax that will ever be increased ever again. So that's
it's very American, right?
That's gonna
very American.
Cause some discomfort among some moderates for sure, and some other people are gonna say, yeah. So it is a bit of an American idea, and it's out there, but it doesn't mean it's not going to connect. The other conservative announcement yesterday was on the energy stuff. Is that he continues the drumbeat for nuclear. He's basically saying, look, the NDP's electricity plant isn't going to work. It's going to be too expensive. And he's basically saying, I'm not going to set a target on EVs. And I'm not going to force electrification on home heating. And those are very clear departures from the NDP, for sure.
Well, I would say they're departures in both cases from mainstream political thinking for the last generation. And they're a plan not to have a plan for taxation. So what's been happening, of course, in California is that in the absence of new revenues from any taxation source, you might get it, I guess, from resource rents or something. But even then, I'm sure the Rostad government would be averse to that. You really can't make investments you need to grow a modern economy in a lot of ways. And on the energy side, it's really a plan to let the private sector build as much as it wants, wherever it wants, and install it. It's the end of Clean BC and the end really of any kind of forward planning. I mean, we know that some of the problems he points to, which are real, we know about them because we do planning and try to figure out what demand will be and how we're going to decarbonize the economy, that kind of thing. So these are what we were talking about earlier with Don, massive pieces that the public may pick up part of and go, yeah, why should I get a heat pump? They're dumb. us policy wonks will be wringing our hands for the rest of our lives about some of these things if they come to pass.
Well, I think he's picked up on some vulnerabilities though in the NDP approach. Well, first of all, on the taxation side, the NDP just came down with an income tax cut on the weekend. So now he's doubled down. It kind of reminds me of the bridge toll discussions. Like, the NDP come up with, well, we'll do a tax cut. And like the BC Liberals did, we'll take off half the tolls. And then Conservatives like, boom, we'll just give you a referendum on it. So they're certainly trying to double down there. But on the energy side,
and Mike,
Hydro is importing more electricity now, and he's making hay on that. And he's basically saying hydro is not going to get it done, so let's go find new sources of renewables, or not. I don't know if you call nuclear renewable, but you can argue that it's clean from a greenhouse gas emission perspective. So he's saying let's go down that road. Now that's a long-term play, because it's got to be probably 15, 20 years before anyone sees a nuclear plant around here.
The frame he's using is restore energy independence. Sorry, Geoff, go ahead.
Well, Mike and I both got a chance to sit in the West Annex of the legislature in 2017, and it's impossible to compare this political landscape with that one from the standpoint of climate policy. We see the Greens on the ropes with their platform promising to get rid of LNG, double down on renewables, stop fracking, protect old growth forests. It's a real echo of the past on all those fronts. In many respects, Rustad wants to go even further back to the day when we didn't do anything. We've had a ban on nuclear energy development here in the province since Gordon Campbell was very early in his premiership. So we're going back a generation on that as well.
Well, nuclear is one that,
is different. But the Green Party and environmental issues generally are nowhere right now. And that's a hard thing for me to wrap my head around.
Yeah. Well, let's move this then into because David Eby was out talking about healthcare and about paying for travel for rural British Columbians trying to access care, paying for their mileage. And I was thinking about this. I think it was you, Mike, who first raised the idea that what the NDP need to do is to kind of move hard on a topic like healthcare that they can win. And I'm going to guess that maybe while this announcement might be nice, it's not the type of thing you were thinking of. What's a kind of announcement on healthcare that might turn the page?
Well, I think it's better for them to talk about healthcare than some other topics. But, I think they have to draw a contrast on their healthcare offering versus the Conservative healthcare offering. Now, this is challenging for them because, just the other night in the news, there's another ER closure, and, those pressures of the current system are all around them. But it's basically comes down to paying for healthcare or not paying for healthcare. I think that's probably the key division. Are the Conservatives going to introduce? Rust has already said at the UBCM speech he wants to look at other models that allow for more private delivery within the public healthcare system. But do the NDP have a wedge there? I don't know. I do think the public is in a mood right now that they want to see some change on some things that don't seem to be working. So what's the NDP alternative? And you've got a health minister who's been there for 7 years. And that, to me, that's probably not a big part of the narrative, because cabinet ministers usually aren't. But there's not exactly been a fresh approach there, notwithstanding the minister's obviously command of the file. So, I think if they're going to turn that into a wedge, they got to find a fresh angle there.
Geoff, any thoughts on what they could do to bring the conversation?
It's a good announcement, and no one can disagree with it. It was very popular in the interior, but it's an extremely small bore for the kind of problem that he faces. Exactly. I would agree with Don that the challenge for the NDP is that although the public still, as I understand it, thinks that David Eby is a good guy and is working hard and has his heart in the right place, have not heard what his vision is and why he needs 4 years to try to accomplish it. And from a Rustad standpoint, here's this relatively affable guy who has a few out of the box ideas like climate change is about population control, but they're not really hearing that. And he doesn't seem like a terrible person. And they're sick of what they've been going through. And my view is it's probably not supported by polling, but part of the change narrative is related to the fact that if you look at what people's lives have been like, particularly in the interior over the last 6 or 7 years, it's been big wildfires every year, evacuation alerts, atmospheric rivers, a pandemic, economic downturn in terms of mill closures, lots of difficulty understanding what happens next if LNG Canada doesn't go to a second phase. Those are all very different contexts for people in those parts of the world that compared to downtown here in Vancouver, where and Victoria, where the NDP continues to be very strong. And in the Valley, you have a lot of people who work in both places. So, how that all gets knit together will be very interesting to see. I don't think urban voters have a lot of interest in what Rustad's offering, but there is a sense of malaise, which has got nothing to do with any political decisions that were made. And that's a hard one for the NDP.
Guests, I want to talk to you today about the employees of FortisBC and community giving. FortisBC's commitment to building and maintaining positive community relationships extends throughout BC to every town and city where the more than 2,700 employees of FortisBC live and work. Last year, FortisBC supported more than 300 grassroots initiatives in communities across the province. This includes organizations like the Trail Wildlife Association, Nelson Search and Rescue, Powell River Salmon Society, Fort Nelson Community Literacy Society, Squamish Nation Youth Powwow, Surrey Libraries, and the Caledon Volunteer Fire Department. In addition, through their Community Giving Awards, FortisBC provides funding to groups for their work meeting community needs. Organizations like the North Okanagan Good Food Box will use this support to provide more families and seniors in need with fresh, healthy produce from local farmers. Last year, FortisBC invested $6.7 million in BC communities through donations and sponsorships, a 49% increase over 2022, reflecting their commitment to supporting community needs where the employees of FortisBC live and work. FortisBC, energy for a better BC and a better podcast.
All right. Let's go grab a coffee. Mike, do you want to start us off this week?
Sure. Yesterday, the NDP made, or maybe in the last couple of days, NDP made an announcement about more transit investment on the North Shore, which I think people in the North Shore would like. I was struck though by the comments of Mayor Linda Buchanan, who, as a member of the Mayor's Council, made the point of saying, well, that's great. TransLink has a serious cash crunch, and that's really the priority here. And I thought good for Mayor Buchanan for trying to bring the debate back to the meat and potatoes of transit delivery in the region. That while we all want more transit investment, transit infrastructure, it's not going to work if TransLink falls apart and there's no sustainable funding. And Mayor Buchanan, who I believe is bird of the same political feather as Bowen Ma, and I think it took a bit of courage to go out and take a different message in the same news cycle as Bowen Ma, who was pushing the SkyTrain and rapid buses and all that kind of stuff, and bringing it back to hey, the system's broken here. So I'll raise my coffee to Mayor Buchanan and we're doing our job as a member of the Mayor's Council to shine a light on that issue.
Nice one. Geoff.
I've got an espresso in each hand. One is for the taxi industry, because this is an interesting one that I followed more closely than I should have probably. But the Indo-Canadian Voice reported last week that the Conservatives had briefly promised to get rid of Class 4 licenses, which are required for all people who drive Ubers or taxis. And it was one of the key demands of the taxi industry when they wanted some kind of level playing field with ride hail. And then, according to the Canadian Voice, the Conservatives rapidly took it down because getting rid of Class 4 is a big problem for the taxi industry. There's about 30,000 drivers out there. I don't think it's a big problem for the ride-hailing companies, although they won't complain about it. It's just a little symbol of how important it is when you're trying to mobilize votes in close ridings like in Surrey to keep certain groups on side, and the taxi industry is one that can really help or hurt you if they're out campaigning. So I thought that was an intriguing little sign of how politics is working, and that someone in the Conservative office is paying attention because they first put this up and then took it quickly down. And my second glass of espresso is for Charlie Smith, former editor of the Georgia Straight, who's writing a daily Substack blog about his decision to run as an independent in Richmond. And so he's documenting his experience of running for office, trying to get the signatures and talking about the issues in Richmond. And I'm enjoying it and learning a lot from it. So I encourage everybody to take a look at Charlie Smith's Substack blog.
Fantastic.
That's an interesting candidacy, Charlie Smith.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Good for him. Okay.
I will wrap us up. Don kind of scooped me on my latte this morning. Because I wanted to talk, I guess I'm raising my glass to John Rostad again. It's an interesting thing because I was noticing, yesterday there were some headlines about John Rostad. I'm going to call it flipping, flopping, flippity doodling, like he's all over on Drippa. And it's really like, if you kind of go back to even standing up for the unanimous vote, like over, and then saying he's going to tear it up. And then yesterday it was no, I'm going to keep it there in so much as it doesn't get in the way of economic reconciliation. And the interesting thing is like, and I want to say like, I'm glad he's come back to this. Like I don't want to sound like, like it's actually a good thing that politicians will sort of take sober second looks at these things and the promises they make. But I think, my glass is raised to John Rostad because, whereas Eby has sort of made these more subtle, slighter shifts and been called a flip-flopper, John Rostad appears to be connecting with voters in a way that he can do that and they're okay with it. And I do hope we get to have that conversation again with Don because I am fascinated by this dynamic and who pulls these pivots off and who doesn't. So we will look forward to discussing that again with you guests at a future episode. Thank you for joining us, guests, for episode 7 of our daily election podcast. Thank you to our presenting sponsor, Talus, and our sponsors, Fortis BC and BC Dairy. Thanks to Don Guy for joining us today. We will see you Thursday, guests. BC, you can never leave.
Checkout time at Hotel Pacifico. We hope you enjoyed your stay.